The year is 1944, a tempestuous epoch etched in the annals of human history. Europe, a continent scarred and ravaged, lay prostrate beneath the iron heel of war. Amidst the fractured landscape of Italy, where ancient ruins stood as silent sentinels to a bygone era, a clandestine operation was underway, orchestrated by the dark architects of the Third Reich. Elite units, loyal to the twisted ideology of National Socialism, moved with ruthless precision, their mission shrouded in secrecy, their purpose as sinister as the shadows that clung to the crumbling walls of forgotten cities. They sought a treasure, a relic of the past imbued with a malevolent power. It was a book, a tome whispered to hold the key to Aryan supremacy, the justification for unimaginable atrocities. Its pages, it was believed, contained the very essence of their twisted worldview, providing an academic veneer to their hateful dogma. This was no mere historical document. It was a weapon, a tool to solidify their dominion over the minds of men and to legitimize the systematic annihilation of those deemed undesirable. Imagine, if you will, the chilling implications of such a belief. The cold, calculated dehumanization of entire populations, fueled by a perversion of historical narrative. The book was so potent, its symbolic value so immense, that Heinrich Himmler, the chilling mastermind at the helm of the Schutzstaffel, the SS, would stop at nothing to possess it. He understood the profound impact of controlling the narrative, of shaping the past to serve the present, even if it meant rewriting history in rivers of blood. This is the chronicle of that perilous quest, the untold narrative of the Nazi pursuit of the instrument of authority. It is a dark tale of delusion, manipulation, and the terrifying consequences of unchecked power. In the nascent days of 1933, as the winter winds howled through the streets of Berlin, Adolf Hitler ascended to the Chancellorship of Germany, his rise to power a spectacle of calculated ambition and opportunistic exploitation of national sentiments. Yet, beneath the veneer of absolute authority, his grip on the reins of power remained precarious. The National Socialist German Workers' Party, while enjoying considerable public support, had not secured an absolute majority. The nation remained deeply divided, fractured along ideological and political fault lines. To solidify his position and forge a unified national identity, Hitler recognized the imperative of crafting a powerful mythology, a narrative that would bind the disparate elements of German society together under a common banner of shared heritage and destiny. Consider the historical context. A nation forged from a collection of disparate states, a relatively recent construct still grappling with its own identity. How does one weld such diverse elements into a cohesive whole? The answer, as Hitler saw it, lay in the creation of a compelling myth, a story of origins that would elevate the German people above all others. Thus, the myth of the Aryan race was born, a narrative steeped in pseudo-scientific theories and historical distortions, designed to appeal to the deepest aspirations of national pride and cultural identity. The Nazis propagated the notion that the Germans were direct descendants of a superior race, the Aryans, who had supposedly originated from the legendary Atlantis, the mythical island nation first described by Plato as the cradle of civilization. According to their fantastical narrative, these Aryans had migrated from Atlantis in prehistoric times, settling on the North German plains and establishing a civilization of unparalleled brilliance. These were portrayed as tall, fair-haired warriors endowed with a unique genius for innovation and cultural creation. They were the progenitors of all that was noble and virtuous in human civilization. Hitler, in his delusional worldview, believed that the German people were the direct heirs to this legacy of Aryan greatness, destined to lead the world into a new era of prosperity and enlightenment. The need to establish a lineage reaching back to the dawn of civilization was palpable. It was a means of legitimizing their claim to dominance, of asserting their rightful place at the apex of the human hierarchy. Before the rise of the ancient Greeks and Romans, the Nazis claimed, The ancestors of the Germans had already forged a magnificent civilization in northern Europe, a testament to their inherent superiority. This relentless pursuit of historical validation reveals a fundamental insecurity, a deep-seated need to justify their present position by conjuring a glorious past. It is a common human tendency, perhaps, to seek validation through historical narrative, to project our aspirations and values onto the tapestry of the past. However, in the hands of the Nazis, this tendency was twisted into a dangerous tool of political manipulation. The Aryan myth became the cornerstone of their ideological edifice, a means of rallying the German people to their cause and fueling their expansionist ambitions. Every facet of their ideology, every policy decision, was meticulously crafted to reinforce the notion that the Germans were the master race, destined to rule the world. However, there was a glaring problem, a conspicuous lack of evidence to support the existence of this master race. The entire narrative rested on flimsy foundations, a house of cards built on speculation and wishful thinking. But the Nazis were not deterred. They sought to manufacture evidence, to twist historical narratives to fit their ideological agenda. They claimed that an ancient manuscript existed, a long-lost text that would validate their claims and prove the existence of the Aryan race. This book, known as Germania, was purportedly written in Rome nearly 2 millennia prior, during the zenith of the Roman Empire, an empire that stretched from the sun-drenched shores of Africa to the misty lands of Britain. The Germania, however, told of a group of people dwelling in the northern reaches of mainland Europe, a people whom even the mighty Romans could not subdue, the Germanic tribes. In the year 9 AD, one of Rome's most celebrated generals, Publius Quinctilius Varus, led an army of 3 legions into the dense forests of Germania, intent on conquering the unruly tribes. But in the dark, primeval forests of Teutoburg, the Roman legions met their match. The Germanic tribes, led by their fierce warrior King Arminius, known in German as Hermann, ambushed the Romans, inflicting a devastating defeat. All 3 Roman legions were annihilated, a catastrophe that sent shockwaves throughout the empire. Germania represented for the Romans a source of profound emotion, precisely because of this disastrous defeat in 9 AD. The loss of those 3 legions under Varus was a wound to Roman pride that never fully healed. The Roman Emperor Augustus, upon hearing of the defeat, reportedly cried out in anguish, "Quintili var, legionis rede." Varus, give me back my legions. He conceded that the Germanic tribes were too formidable to be conquered, a message that resonated with subsequent emperors. The forests of Germania became synonymous with danger, a forbidding and unconquerable land. The Nazis, seizing upon this historical narrative, claim that the modern Germans were the direct descendants of Arminius's fearsome warriors, the victors over the mighty Roman Empire. They further believed that the Germania, the ancient text itself, held written proof of the superiority of their ancestors, a validation of their claim to Aryan heritage. They envisioned the Germania as a powerful tool for propaganda, a means of inspiring national pride and galvanizing support for their regime. The myth of Aryan ancestry would become more than just a story, but a mandate. The fabled Germania was not penned by a German, but by a Roman, a senator and orator named Cornelius Tacitus, who lived around the year 98 AD. Tacitus was a man of considerable stature in Roman society, one of the most accomplished speakers of his generation, whose oratory skills were renowned throughout the empire. His political career was exemplary, culminating in his appointment as a consul, one of the highest offices in the Roman state. He's widely regarded as one of the greatest Roman historians, a keen observer of human nature and a master of prose. Tacitus wrote during a period of profound social and political upheaval in Roman history, a time of decadence and corruption that marked the reigns of Emperors Tiberius, Claudius, and Nero. His works are filled with detailed accounts of the sordid affairs and moral failings of the Roman elite, a stark contrast to his portrayal of the Germanic tribes. In his account of Germania, Tacitus appears to be filled with praise for these people, extolling their virtues and contrasting them with the perceived vices of Roman society. It is said that no other nation, no other group of people, caused the Romans as much trouble as the Germans with their unyielding pursuit of autonomy. Tacitus admired their fierce independence and their unwavering resistance to Roman rule. In the Germania, Tacitus meticulously describes the culture of the Germanic tribes, providing detailed accounts of their gods, their customs, their methods of selecting kings, their weapons of war, and their rigorous training of youth as warriors. These characteristics are presented in a favourable light, as qualities that the Romans themselves should emulate. For example, their chastity and simplicity, their lack of interest in material wealth and profit. No one in Germania laughs at vice, Tacitus wrote, nor do they call it the fashion to corrupt and to be corrupted. They choose their kings by birth, their generals by merit, he observed. No nation indulges more profusely in entertainments and hospitality. Tacitus's descriptions seem to align perfectly with the image of their ancestors that the Nazis were keen to promote to the German people, an idealized portrayal of noble savages, untainted by the corruption of civilization. There is a long tradition of reading the Germania as a glorification of the noble savage, a romanticized depiction of a people living in harmony with nature, untouched by the decadence of urban life. More than that, Tacitus describes the physical characteristics of these mighty Germans, writing of their fierce blue eyes, blonde hair, and towering frames. In short, the perfect Aryans. For the Nazis, the Germania was proof that the German people were descended from a mighty race, superior to all others, a direct link to their Aryan origins. The words of Tacitus would resonate deeply with one German in particular, a man who would later wield immense power and shape the course of history. In 1924, a young unsuccessful chicken farmer named Heinrich Himmler embarked on a long train journey, and it was during this journey that he first encountered the Germania. The words of Tacitus, written 2,000 years prior, struck a chord within him, confirming many of his long-held beliefs. He found in the Roman historian's account a validation of his own racial theories and his yearning for a return to a mythical Germanic past. After reading the Germania, the young Himmler confided to his diary, "I was lost in a glorious image of the loftiness, purity, and nobleness of our ancestors." He wrote that he hoped that the Germans would once again embody these virtues, a vision that would shape his future actions. The Germania had a profound impact on Himmler, igniting within him a fervent belief in the superiority of the Aryan race and a desire to recreate a Germanic society based on the ideals described by Tacitus. Himmler would go on to become one of the most powerful and influential figures in Nazi Germany, a chilling architect of genocide and a ruthless enforcer of racial purity. Throughout the 1930s, Himmler ascended to positions of increasing power, becoming a key figure in the Third Reich. He's often underestimated, perhaps because of his unassuming demeanour. He appeared bookish, with his spectacles and neatly trimmed hair, an unlikely figure to inspire terror and command absolute loyalty. But beneath the surface of his unremarkable appearance lay a ruthless ambition and an unwavering commitment to the Nazi ideology. Himmler little by little seized control of key institutions within the Nazi state, amassing immense power and influence. He rose to become head of the SS, a fearsome paramilitary organisation that controlled much of the Nazi state's security apparatus. Himmler meticulously shaped the SS in the image of the warrior race described in the Germania, transforming it into an elite force steeped in Germanic mythology and fanatically loyal to Hitler. In many ways, Himmler sought to embody the ideals he had discovered in the Germania, striving to live up to the image of the noble Germanic warrior that Tacitus had portrayed. He envisioned the SS as the vanguard of a future Germanic empire, a force that would cleanse the world of perceived racial impurities and usher in a new era of Aryan dominance. But Himmler's vision extended beyond the SS. He believed that the teachings of Tacitus held profound lessons for all true Germans. The Germania, in his view, was a Bible for every thinking German, a guide to moral elevation, straightforwardness, honour, directness, and bravery, qualities that he believed were embodied by their Germanic ancestors. He sought to transform the Nazi state into a reflection of the ancient German society described by Tacitus, emulating its customs, its values, and its social structures. Just as in the Germania, where children were taught to swear loyalty to their leader, in this case, Adolf Hitler, the chief fights for victory, his vassals fight for their chief, students were taught to emulate their warrior forefathers, engaging in wrestling and exercising with weapons. Naked youths dance amid swords and lances that threaten their lives. Experience gives them skill, and skill again gives grace. The Honour Cross of the German Mother was awarded to women who bore many children, as this was something much admired in Germanian society. The offspring reproduced the strength of the parents, and in the policy of Lebensraum, German people were told that the lands of neighbouring countries, which had once been the home of ancient Germanic tribes, were rightfully theirs. But beyond even that, Himmler would use Tacitus to justify the most evil of all Nazi policies. In 1935, the Nazis implemented the first of many racial laws, known as the Law for the Protection of German Blood and German Honour. It was an ominous first step in the Nazis' anti-Jewish policies. It prohibited marriages between Aryan Germans and Jewish Germans, and was based on one paragraph of the Germania. A key line in the Germania is when Tacitus writes that the Germans are a people unto themselves, the implication being that there is no breeding with any other race or with any other people. They are a homogeneous group of people, as Tacitus said. They hadn't mixed with other people, so not only were they indigenous, but they were pure and unlike any other people. The Nazis used the words of Tacitus to justify policies that would unleash unimaginable terror on the world, giving an academic justification to the idea of a difference between peoples. Once you create the idea that some races are inferior, you then create the idea that some lives are worth less than others. Once you create that idea, then you've got a legitimacy to start murdering people, by the race load. In other words, there is a direct link between their interpretation of the Germania and the Nazi death camps. Because of their understanding of Tacitus, over 11 million people would be murdered in the Nazi genocide. That's how disastrously influential that particular paragraph was. So important was this book to Nazi ideology that Himmler desperately wanted the authentic text. The trouble was that no one knew what had happened to Tacitus's original manuscript. To find it, Himmler turned to one of the strangest and most sinister branches of the SS. It was known as the Ahnenerbe, the Ancestral Heritage Research Association, and had been created by Himmler in 1935. Unlike the Germanic warriors who made up the rest of the SS, the Ahnenerbe was an institution made up of academics. If you want the classic example of how the Nazis manipulated intellectualism and academic behaviour, you can go no further than look at the Ahnenerbe. This was an institution set up ultimately by Himmler to research quote-unquote German ancestry, and it was to look at how you could construct a mythology of Aryanism and Germanic culture. The Ahnenerbe were charged with rewriting history to help Himmler prove that the Aryan Germanic people were superior to all other races. They were genuine intellectuals and researchers and scientists working side by side with real cranks, and there were around, 100 academics of various different sorts working there. You had a support staff of about the same size, so you've got about 200 people, and the Ahnenerbe can't just be seen as a kind of harmless bunch of corrupted academics who were just sucking up to the Nazis because what they were proving was helping to create a worldview that was in essence evil. On Himmler's orders, the Ahnenerbe began to search for Tacitus's lost manuscript. Immediately they encountered a problem. Tacitus's original no longer existed. In the collapse of the Roman Empire and the ensuing centuries of the Dark Ages, many precious documents were lost. But a glimmer of hope remained. The Ahnenerbe discovered that the manuscript had escaped the fires of Rome, and at some point in history, a single perfect copy of the original text had been made. But this too was missing. Well, the survival of classical texts is often a very, very random and hazardous business. The fact that we can read the Germania today dates back to the fact that there was this one manuscript, which was copied. It was said that a travelling Italian scholar had made this beautiful word-for-word copy of the Germania in a monastery in southern Germany in the mid-5th century. This copy of the Germania became known as the Codex Aesinas, and that's the copy that Himmler was trying to get his hands on because it's as close as you can get to the written account of the Germanic past. The Ahnenerbe immediately began hunting down the Codex Aesinas. They scoured the world in their search, and eventually they brought some good news to Himmler. In 1936 they reported that the book he so desperately wanted had been found. The Codex Aesinas had been traced to the east of Italy. For 200 years it had lain in obscurity in the vast private library of an Italian count, the Count Pier Alberto Balestra Balani. My father was a count in Italy. It's a very important title. My father had 3 houses. One is this villa where we are now, the other one is a palace in Osimo, and the other is the palace in Jesi. The Codex Aesinas was stored in the library that they had in the Palazzo in Jesi. People had simply forgotten about it. The Count's libraries contained many other important documents, such as the letters of Casanova and writings by Cicero, so it's fairly easy to see how it would get overlooked. As a result, Count Pier Alberto Balestra Balani was completely unaware of how important the Codex Aesinas was to the Nazis. The Codex Aesinas was the most important book to Germany. We really never realised it was such an important thing. It was in this library of the family, and it was not really. Nobody knew how important it was, but soon that would change. In 1936, Italy was ruled over by Benito Mussolini. Like Hitler, he was another fascist leader. This brutal populist politician had seized control of Italy in a coup in 1922 and declared himself Il Duce, the leader, and since coming to power, Hitler, the German Führer, had been carefully courting his Italian counterpart. Now, on Himmler's request, Hitler petitioned the Italian dictator to obtain the manuscript and present it to the Nazi state. It seemed that Mussolini was more than happy to oblige. Mussolini thought, well, if Hitler wants this book very badly, it's a good idea to give it to him to try and take it from the family. Himmler was convinced that it was only a matter of time before he would have it in his grasp. He planned a triumphant return for the Germania at the 1936 Nazi Party convention, where hundreds of thousands of party members would be in attendance. An enormous Germanic room was built with huge panels featuring quotes from Tacitus, and above the door was a quotation from Hitler himself. German youth shall know manly loyalty was the virtue of the old Germans. The new state is erected upon that virtue. But Himmler hadn't reckoned on the stubbornness of the Count Balestra Balani. An emissary from Mussolini's government was sent to meet the Count at his villa to request him to give up the Codex Aesinas, but Count Pier Alberto Balestra Balani was not used to being bossed around. Mussolini wanted to give it to Hitler as a present, but my father actually didn't like fascism. He didn't like Mussolini. The Count thought Mussolini was ridiculous, and he had no time for the pompous upstart's demands, so he refused to hand over the book. He didn't want to make Mussolini too heavy. He didn't want to make Hitler happy. He didn't want to give it away. I was always proud of my father for everything, just to say no and just to be very nonchalant about it. I think that demonstrates courage and intelligence. Himmler was infuriated by Mussolini's failure. To make matters worse, his best hope of getting the book, Hitler, was losing interest in Himmler's obsessions. Adolf Hitler had, in private conversations on more than one occasion, only snide comments to make. He couldn't quite see what these scholar types, so fascinated with the Germanic past, actually had to contribute to the rise of, the German state. Himmler liked surrounding himself with all this mythology, whereas Hitler thought this was going all a little bit too far. He saw it as being unnecessary. To him, it was about politics and power. But Himmler refused to give up. He continued to put pressure on the Balestra Balanis, sending his own emissaries to meet with the Count. The interest in the book was very, very, very strong, and so they made several attempts to try and and take this book from us. Finally, after 2 years of mounting pressure, Count Pier Alberto made a concession. The Germans couldn't have the book, but they could at least have a look at it. Just before the outbreak of the war, the Count packed up the book and sent it to Rome, where it would be photographed for Himmler. In Rome, it was presented to Himmler's emissary. A member of the Ahnenerbe, Rudolf Till, was given access to the Codex Aesinas in Italy, and he was able to produce a set of photographs. They then used these photographs to produce a Nazi edition of the Codex Aesinas. Himmler even wrote the foreword himself. The future will only be granted to those who understand the stock of their ancestry. But for Himmler, even this was not enough. All he had was a facsimile. He was determined to possess the original, and one day he would have the chance to take it. In 1939, Hitler plunged the world into war. Under Mussolini, Italy was Germany's most important ally. The two dictators eventually found themselves fighting both the Western powers and Russia. After 4 bloody years, the tide of the war turned against the fascist nations. In 1943, Allied forces landed in the south of Italy. Benito Mussolini was overthrown by an Italian revolt, and Italy switched its allegiance to the Allies. To shore up his southern flank, Hitler was forced to send German troops into Italy. Himmler now saw an opportunity to seize the Codex Aesinas from the Balestra-Balaní family. So, with the German advance, Himmler now sent an entire unit of his own SS troops to the region, with the express purpose of tracking the book down. But where was it? The Balestra-Balanis had 3 properties, 2 town palazzi and a country villa. The book could be in any one of them, or none of them. First, Himmler's soldiers were sent to the Balanis' main residence, his villa outside the town of Jesi. Mussolini was dead, and the Germans came looking themselves for the book, but they found the villa empty. Days before, the Count had moved his family out of the villa to one of his other properties to protect them. But Himmler's troops did discover one thing. The Count's servants had taken everything of value from the villa to another of his properties, his palazzo in the town of Jesi, only a few miles away. The Count's treasures had been smuggled out in agricultural carts, hidden from the Germans beneath piles of farm produce. There were many carts that were going at that time in the centre of the town of Jesi, so lots of things were hidden under the wheat and under the grapes. Could it be that the Codex Aesinas was among the valuables? So now Himmler's troops rushed to the palazzo in Jesi. They asked for the book in a very aggressive way, and also here, the waiters and the chauffeur and all the people working in the house, maybe pretending they didn't understand the language, maybe risking also their life, because at those times, life was not so safe like can be today in this kind of situation. But once again, Himmler's troops found nothing. Neither the Germania nor the Balestra family were in the villa at Jesi. Himmler's SS now turned their attentions to the third of the Count's properties, another palazzo 30 kilometres away in the town of Osimo. My family, they all moved to Osimo. They moved there because they were thinking that it was more safe. From their hiding place in Osimo, the Balestra-Balanis witnessed the horrors of life under the Germans. My brother and I used to look from the window, and we really petrified because we saw people beaten up, killed. They just shot them, and so that was really a very, very horrible thing to see, and my parents didn't know we were seeing it. But children, they climb up a window and look down. Eventually Himmler's soldiers arrived at the palazzo. The house itself was all locked. They knocked at the door. They were knocking at the door. I remember this very vividly, and I remember how scared we were that they could break down the door and take my father and kill him. As the Germans searched the palazzo, the family hid in the cellars below. I was 10 years old. My brother one was 9. The other was even less. It was a terrible experience. We spent 18 days down in the cellars without ever coming up. SS soldiers scoured the house, but they never found the cellar door, and the Balestra-Balaní family remained safe. So did the book. May the 8th, 1945, brought an end to 6 years of war in Europe. The Nazi dream of a 1,000-year Reich based on the foundations of an ancient Germanic culture had come to nothing. Hitler had shot himself in his Berlin bunker, and Heinrich Himmler swallowed a cyanide capsule whilst in British custody. This is the house in Lüneburg where Himmler committed suicide. In that room, the most despicable of all German criminals contrived to take poison. With the war over, the truth about the elusive Codex Aesinas would begin to emerge. Did this book really justify the Nazis' murderous policies? And anyway, where was it? One mystery was easily solved. The book had never moved from the first place that Himmler's troops had gone searching for it. The Balestra Balani's villa outside Jesi had a secret room. This room has a false window. From the outside, you see it, but in fact there is not a window that you can open. The room with the false window had a hidden door concealed by a wardrobe. The door that was already a safety door by itself was also protected by furniture, so that you can even see the door behind the wardrobe. Behind the hidden door sat a simple chest. Inside this room, there is this. We say Italian usually. You keep laundry inside. Concealed inside a pile of laundry lay the thing that had so obsessed Himmler, Tacitus's Germania. With the threat of the Nazis gone, the Balestra Balanis no longer had to hide the book. The Italian government now recognized it as a national treasure, and the Balestra Balanis would display it with pride in their library in Jesi for the next 20 years. Every year the Italian government sent some inspectors to see if the book was still with us, if it was well kept. One year, the inspectors asked the Count to bring the book to Florence as they couldn't make it to Jesi. In 1966 they were in Florence, these inspectors, and they said, "Well, I take the book to Florence, and I'll show you the book." There, the Count took the book to Florence in person, where he placed it in an underground bank vault overnight for safekeeping. The following day he would take it to the inspectors, but then disaster. That was the night of the flood in Florence. November the 4th, 1966, saw the worst flooding in Florence's history, and water found what Himmler never could. A flood came, and they weren't waterproof, so all the water with the gas, with the oil and paintings, they all went completely ruined. This manuscript was ruined for the first 2 or 3 pages and the last 2 or 3 pages. It was seriously damaged. The first and the last pages were almost black. The writing looked like a negative. It looked as if this treasure had been destroyed forever. Months of costly and painstaking restoration followed, and the damage of the flooding was undone. Today, the Codex Aesinas sits in the Biblioteca Nazionale in Rome. After nearly 200 years of holding the book, the Balestra Balani family had decided that the Codex Aesinas should be available for all to see. Little by little, we decided that this book was better if it was kept in a public place, and so then we gave it to the state, and it went to Rome, to the National Library in Rome. Now that the oldest version of Tacitus's manuscript can be studied by experts from all nations, a very different picture of the ancient Germans than that promoted by Himmler has emerged. For a start, Tacitus was not as enraptured with the Germans as Himmler had made out. Tacitus attributes several clearly negative characteristics to the Germanic tribes. He basically speaks of their tendency towards drunkenness. To pass an entire day and night in drinking disgraces no one. Their quarrels are seldom fought out with mere abuse, but commonly with wounds and bloodshed. They are represented as liking their drink too much and having banquets, feasts during the day, this sort of thing. They themselves lie buried in sloth, a strange combination in their nature, that the same men should be so fond of idleness, so averse to peace. He explicitly writes about their almost addiction to gambling. He also comments on what he describes as a form of laziness. Basically, they pass much of their time in idleness, giving themselves up to sleep and to feasting, the bravest and the most warlike doing nothing, a sort of simple society, but one which has its flaws. In fact, what Tacitus described was far from the perfect Aryan society claimed by Himmler. In every household, the children, naked and filthy, they will be overcome by their own vices as easily as by the arms of an enemy. It has become increasingly clear that the Ahnenerbe had only taken from Tacitus what they could use to support Himmler's theories of Germany's noble Aryan ancestors. They blatantly misinterpreted, misread and misquoted particular passages that didn't really fit their particular ideological view to make it fit their ideological view. They've been highly selective. They've taken little bits of it, primarily around chapter 4, where he's talking about their racial purity, their blue eyes, their blonde hair, that sort of thing. And they've taken this work and very much, I think, made it what they want it to be. And the Nazis had chosen to keep hidden another key fact about Tacitus. He had almost certainly never even seen any of the Germans he was writing about, and had no real evidence for his statements about them. Some of his descriptions were plainly made up. By the end of the monograph, you have this fantasy, bizarre sort of image of people with human faces but the bodies of animals, so it begins to enter the world of the fantastic, so you have to be wary of that when you're reading these texts. Himmler also willfully ignored another fact. Modern-day Germans could not be the direct descendants of the Germans. The Nazis, in referring to the Germanic tribes, refer to them as ancient Germans or the old Germans, and that's exactly the kind of step that you must not make because it is a simplification. The Germans are different from the group. The people that we would think of today as Germans, that's just the name that came to be used for the whole group of people. They misidentified the German ancestors with the Germanic tribes that Tacitus just describes, so you simply can't say that the Germanic tribes were the German ancestors. The truth was that Hitler's Germans were descendants of many different peoples, not a single ancient tribe. There was no German nation, and the whole tribal situation changed dramatically several times over the following centuries, so you can simply say, those are our ancestors. But Himmler was unconcerned about the truth of what Tacitus really said, and the truth of the origins of the German people. He desired the Codex Aesinas to help promote the vicious and racist policies of the Nazis, and the tragic fact is that even without ever laying his hands on the original, he was still able to use the words of Tacitus to aid the Nazis in their murderous policies, which resulted in the death of millions.